Good morning, Central Kentucky. This is Sandra Leslie White coming to you live from WJMM Studios here outside of Lexington, Kentucky, and shouting out to all of you around the country, WJMM.com and Facebook. Good morning. Okay, so this is kind of a tough topic today. The question is, have you ever been addicted to anything or anyone? Addicted to anything or anyone. In our country today, statistics tell us either we are addicted to something, it's either food, alcohol, drugs, painkillers, work, caffeine, this goes on. But we're talking about things that destroy us. That was the topic of yesterday's message, self-destruction, and today is self-destruction 2, the second and closing version of that message. I just wanted to shout out really to all of the people who were involved with a musical here in the Lexington area last month called Last Call. It was a really dramatic portrayal of addiction. It was set within an AA meeting. That was how it was staged, and it was extremely challenging to me and to, I would imagine, anyone who had the opportunity to see that. My daughter Susanna Lee White was in that particular musical. And perhaps the most difficult thing, well, surely the most difficult thing about the entire musical was that I saw her portraying an alcoholic and a drug addict. And in one of her final scenes, well, clearly her final scene, she sang this haunting song about angels and feeling like she was flying and then feeling like she was dying. And I watched my daughter on stage die as this character of an overdose. I don't know about you, but I know of people who have OD'd, and one wonderful woman who was a part of my children's life, their school life at Sayre School, died of an overdose last year and was found dead on West 6th Street, I think, in Lexington. This was not at all expected. So what is going on in the land, and how can we find answers for our own self-destruction in Hosea? As we continue the discussion of self-destruction in Hosea 4:6, and I'll read that today from the New American Standard Version. And we have been in this passage all week. We'll move on next week. But it is the foundational verse, many would say, in Hosea. Certainly the most famous verse in Hosea. And so I'll share that with you today. Hosea 4:6, New American Standard Version says, "My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I also will reject you from being my priest. Since you have forgotten the law of your God, I also will forget your children." If you're just listening in now, this is Sandra Leslie White on Lifting the Veil. We are in Hosea 4:6 talking about self-destruction. In yesterday's show, I introduced an article out of Psychology Today by a woman, Peggy Lee Wupperman. She talked about self-destructive or dysregulated behaviors. And her research really stood against this whole idea of addictive personalities. She said this, and I'll repeat the opening and go into some more detail about people who struggle with addiction. She said this: people who struggle with dysregulated behavior, she doesn't call them addictions, can differ dramatically but tend to share some common traits. The following description is oversimplified. It might not fully apply to you, but it provides a general idea. If you struggle with dysregulated behaviors, you probably were born with a tendency to feel emotions a little more strongly than other people do. This is not a negative trait. In fact, you are likely to be more creative and or more empathetic. Unfortunately, you also may have grown up in an adverse or invalidating environment. Adverse environments may include, and she lists some of these, extreme experiences such as physical abuse, neglect, or continuous criticism. Routine experiences with family members who discourage expression of emotions or use dysregulated behaviors to cope with their own emotions. Experiences outside the home, such as bullying at school, abuse by another caretaker, routinely being excluded by other children, etc. If you were born with a tendency to feel strong emotion and you were routinely put in situations that would be emotionally painful for anyone, then the pain probably started to feel unbearable at times. Chances are high that you eventually tried to turn off the pain. At first, you may have told yourself, I'm just going to try not to feel, or I'm just not going to think about it. But over time, you probably felt like you needed additional help with turning off painful emotions. And so you resorted to one or more dysregulated behaviors. These behaviors can seem so effective in the short term that you might have never learned adaptive ways to handle negative emotions. In addition, using a dysregulated behavior to turn off uncomfortable emotions is like putting an airtight lid on a pot of boiling water. The emotions are still there, just like the boiling water and steam. The behavior provides relief for a short time, but the emotions keep building, just like the steam and pressure keep building on the covered pot. Eventually, you may feel as though you are almost always under pressure. If the emotions are never experienced or processed, if none of the steam is released from the pot, the pressure will keep building until the pot eventually explodes. The emotions, in other words, will feel especially unbearable. As a result, you may try even harder not to feel the emotions, possibly by engaging in the dysregulated behavior. In parentheses, she says, putting the lid back on the pot. If so, you'll feel relief for a short time, but the pressure will almost always start building again, and the cycle will likely repeat and repeat. All right, if you're just joining in, this is Sandra Leslie White talking about self-destruction in Hosea 4:6 and looking at this article out of Psychology Today. I think it has a lot of truth to that. That makes a whole lot of sense to me. For those of you who know people that struggle with, as she says, dysregulated behaviors, we call it addiction today. I'm not liking that word this morning. She says they're called either self-destructive or dysregulated behaviors. I like that so much better. So the title of my message, Self-Destruction. Self-destructive or dysregulated behaviors provide relief or even pleasure in the short term. But we all know that God is about the long term. I think reflecting on Hosea, not just 4:6 this morning, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. And that lack of knowledge is an interesting word, interesting phase, and we've talked about that, being using all the senses. That is what that word knowledge means, using all the senses to know God, all the senses to know yourself. This lack of knowledge is what causes self-destruction, according to Hosea 4:6. And so I think it's so important to then reflect on Hosea chapters 1 all the way to chapter 4 verse 6 and realize especially in chapter 2, which is my favorite chapter, I think the most powerful chapter in the Bible, is that the Lord intervenes in our lives. He intervened in the life of Gomer between verses 13 and 14 of Hosea chapter 2. He intervenes, he interrupts her destructive behavior. As a matter of fact, he's very angry, and he just says in the first part of chapter 2, I'm just going to let her, go pursue her lovers, destroy herself, and I'll just file for divorce and forget her. And then he changes his mind. He does. He changes his approach. I see the gospel just crashing through between Hosea 2, 13 and 14. When God completely redirects his emotions toward romance and romancing Gomer and loving her into himself, and then removing all the false gods from her and asking her for her hand in marriage, being betrothed to her in faithfulness, in love, in kindness. And so then she runs away again, such as the life of those of us who struggle with dysregulated behaviors or self-destruction. And it could be at a very, very, very low. Maybe it's a really private, maybe it's a secret. Maybe your dysregulated behavior really does keep you holed up in your house, and your own destructive behaviors swirl around you in the privacy of your own home. Or maybe yours are really overt in that you just show up drunk at somebody's house, and there it is again. So I just want to speak into all of us. We live in a culture of addiction. We live in a culture of self-destruction. We live in a culture of dysregulated behavior, according to the psychologists and Psychology Today. And I believe still with all my heart, because I certainly have had my share of self-destructive behavior. I was born into a family, a lovely family, that struggled, though, with alcoholism. And this became truly devastating to my brother. And he succumbed to alcoholism and nearly died. And so I'm familiar with dysregulated behavior. And it has followed me all the days of my life until the Lord God intervened into my life through a word from Hosea chapter 2, verse 16, where he said he would be my dear husband and that he would take me into the wilderness and speak tenderly to my heart and take me from Heartbreak Valley into acres of hope. Isn't that what we all need today? We all need to be taken from Heartbreak Valley into acres of hope. And I believe with all my heart that he has the most powerful love on the planet, and that if indeed we will let him in, if indeed we can shake off all that old-time religion maybe that has taught us who God isn't really in the scriptures. He's not who you think he is. He is not out to get you. He is pursuing you and me with the most powerful love on the planet, and the only kind of love that can continuously chase us and eventually catch us and turn our Heartbreak Valley into acres of hope. Would you let him catch you today? I don't care what you're struggling with. I don't care whether it's food, alcohol, drugs, sex addiction, work. I don't know what it is, but we've all got something that's just keeping us in the grips of the enemy. Let us let God's powerful love truly set us free. God bless you today. We'll see you tomorrow.